Picture this. You are 12 years old, right? You're standing at a chalkboard at the front of this brightly lit room, and the chalk in your hand feels like strangely heavy.
Oh, yeah, I can picture it.
Yeah, and behind you, 25 of your peers are just staring in total silence.
Hmm.
On the board in front of you is this algebraic equation that, I mean, it might as well be written in ancient hieroglyphs. Your heart is pounding. Your palms are sweating. You don't just feel confused. You feel entirely exposed. You just want to disappear.
Wow, yeah. It is a completely visceral memory for so many of us. And the wild thing is, the biological response happening in that student's body right then, it's indistinguishable from a physical threat.
Wait, really? Like a literal threat?
Absolutely. Their brain isn't processing numbers anymore. It is actively processing panic. It's fight or flight.
That is wild. But if you've ever stared at a complex spreadsheet at work and felt your mind just go entirely blank, or if you still break into a cold sweat calculating a tip at a restaurant, you know exactly what that feels
Why,
like.
totally. We all carry that bag.
Right. So today, we are embarking on a very special kind of expeditionary deep dive. We're exploring a fascinating source today. It's called Part I, Creating an Adventurer from the Mathematical Thinking Laboratory, Grade 76 Field Guide.
It's such a unique document.
It really is, but let me be clear right up front to anyone listening. This is not about rote memorization, okay? It is not a syllabus for another boring math class. This is, it's essentially a briefing for a survival expedition in a harsh, frozen frontier known as Frostfall.
Exactly. It's a completely different paradigm for learning. Because for decades, traditional math instruction has, well, it's prioritized compliance. It's primarily been about answer getting.
Right. Just getting to the number at the bottom of the page.
Yeah. And research into educational psychology shows us that this creates a really dangerous illusion of learning. Like, a student can mimic a teacher's steps, fill out a worksheet perfectly, and look like they totally understand the concept.
But they don't.
No, because the moment you change a single variable or present the problem in a new format, that understanding just collapses. So what we are unpacking today is this groundbreaking framework that merges cognitive science, group psychology, and, of all things, role-playing game mechanics.
Which is just so cool.
It is. And it uses all of that to completely rebuild how the student actually thinks.
So whether you are an educator, a parent of a middle schooler, or just someone fascinated by how the human brain overcomes complex challenges, we're going to show you how this guide constructs a resilient problem-solving identity.
That's the core of it, really, identity.
Right. But before we step out into the freezing, howling winds of Frostfall, an explorer has to know exactly who they are and, what they are protecting.
Which brings us to the psychological reality of middle school math. By the time students reach this age, like 12 or 13, many of them have firmly adopted the identity of, I'm just bad at math.
Oh, yeah. You hear it all the time. It becomes almost like a badge of honor.
Yes. It becomes a core personality trait. But if we actually look at the cognitive science, this is rarely a lack of inherent ability. And it certainly isn't defiance, even though it looks like it.
Wait, let me challenge that for a second. Because the standard societal response when a kid says, I'm bad at math, or when they just tune out in the back of the class, is usually, well, they just aren't trying hard enough.
Right, we assume it's laziness.
Exactly. Middle schoolers are notoriously cynical and, apathetic. So are you saying they are actually just protecting themselves?
Absolutely. The whole just focus or try harder response fundamentally misunderstands how the brain works. The human brain has this invisible, hardwired limit called working memory.
Okay, working memory.
Right. Think of working memory like a mental juggling act. You can only keep so many balls in the air at once. So in a traditional math class, a student is trying to interpret a word problem, recall a formula they learned last week, track multiple calculation steps.
And monitor their own handwriting for errors all simultaneously.
Yes. So they have way too many balls in the air. And when that cognitive load exceeds the capacity of their working memory, thinking doesn't just slow down, it literally stops. The whole system crashes.
Wow.
And when you combine that repeated, unavoidable internal confusion with the public failure that happens in traditional classrooms, like standing at that chalkboard, the brain starts to associate math with trauma.
So disengagement is the logical response.
Exactly. If I don't try, I can't publicly fail.
Okay, I'm really starting to see the architecture of this system now. So creating an adventurer in this mathematical thinking lab, it isn't about rolling a, level 99 wizard to just escape reality.
No, not
It's more like putting on a suit of armor, because the student has been taking psychological damage from math anxiety for years, and this character they create gives them a safe distance to engage with the material without their fragile, real-world ego taking the hit. Is that the mechanism?
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Disengagement is a shield, sure, but the adventurer persona is much better active shield. When a student builds an adventurer for Frostfall, they are basically constructing a growth mindset avatar.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. The student themselves might be utterly terrified of raising their hand and being wrong, but their character is an explorer braving a tundra.
Right. The character's brave even if the kid isn't.
Exactly. The character can take risks, the character can make mistakes, the character can engage in what researchers call productive struggle. The avatar can handle the vulnerability and the trial and error that the student currently cannot handle.
That is such a powerful shift in perspective. But it makes me wonder about the mechanics of the game itself. Once a student has this protective shell, this avatar, how do we define what makes them strong?
Right. How do we measure it?
Yeah, because looking through the field guide, these adventurers are not your typical fantasy power bills wielding magic swords and fireballs.
No, the aesthetic and the mechanics are deeply grounded in reality. Instead of traditional role-playing stats like, strength, dexterity, or charisma, their traits represent actual cognitive thinking styles.
Okay, so what are the stats?
We're looking at specific traits like grit, logic, focus, ingenuity, communication, and awareness.
I'm trying to picture this on a random Tuesday morning in a classroom. In a standard video game, I roll for strength to smash a wooden door down, right?
Right.
But in Frostfall, how am I using these traits? Am I using grit to force my way through a multi-step equation when I get stuck, or like ingenuity to draw a visual model when the raw numbers aren't making sense?
You're actually spot on. Let's use your example. Say a student is faced with a complex fractions problem, something abstract like dividing 3/4 by 1/2.
Okay, the classic nightmare problem.
Exactly. Traditional mathematics teaches routine expertise. You just memorize the rule, keep, change, flip. But memorization alone fails the moment a student encounters a problem that's formatted even slightly differently.
Right, they panic.
Yes. So this system develops what we call adaptive expertise. If a student's routine fails, they look at their character sheet. A student with high ingenuity doesn't just stare at the numbers. They draw a visual model.
Like drawing a pizza.
Yeah. They draw 3/4 of a pizza and figure out how many half pizzas fit into it. Meanwhile, a student using logic might look for patterns in the numerators. And a student relying on grit recognizes that their first 2 attempts failed. But the trait literally rewards them for attempting a third method without quitting.
Oh, wow. So it shifts the whole goal. The goal is no longer just being the fastest human calculator in the room. The goal is strategic flexibility.
Precisely. The traits give students a vocabulary to understand their own thinking processes. A student might realize, hey, I'm really struggling with the logic of this algebraic equation, but I have high communication stats.
So they can explain what they do know to the group.
Exactly. They can clearly explain the part they do understand to their team to get help. It quantifies what educational psychologists call habits of mind, teaching them how to think, not just what steps to execute.
Which naturally leads us to the next massive piece of this survival guide. You mentioned communicating with a team. Because no one survives the endless winter of Frostfall alone, right?
Definitely not.
The trope of the solitary math genius, scribbling equations alone in a basement, that is exactly the myth this system is trying to shatter.
It is an incredibly damaging myth. Mathematics, both in the professional world and in this laboratory, is treated as a highly social, collaborative, and strategic activity.
Which introduces the concept of the guild.
Yes, the guild. The field guide explicitly breaks down specific guild roles for the students. You have the navigator, engineer, scout, quartermaster, archivist, and tactician.
I have to say, looking at these roles, it feels like putting together a heist crew. But like for algebra, let's play this out. If a group of students is facing a massive boss encounter math problem, it's not a solo sprint to see who finishes first. How do these roles actually interact?
Okay, let's put your heist crew into action. Say the boss encounter is designing the dimensions of a thermal shelter using surface area and volume.
Okay, heavy stuff.
Very. So the navigator is the one interpreting the prompt, finding multiple entry points to the math, so the group isn't just paralyzed at the starting line.
So they get the ball rolling. What about the quartermaster?
The quartermaster is managing the physical tools. Maybe they're manipulating 3D geometric blocks to test ideas. Then you have the archivist, who is actively documenting the team's visual representations on the board.
And the tactician.
The tactician is keeping an eye on the clock and ensuring the group doesn't get bogged down on a dead-end strategy.
That is brilliant. Everyone has a job, so no one can hide, but also no one has to carry the whole cognitive load alone.
Exactly. And this aligns perfectly with modern educational research on group psychology,
Hmm.
specifically concepts from building thinking classrooms.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, traditional instruction often creates a really toxic hierarchy. You have the smart kid who finishes the worksheet in 5 minutes, and the dumb kid who just copies their answers to avoid trouble.
Right, just surviving the class.
But the guild system proves that every single learner contributes a different, necessary type of intelligence.
You mentioned the archivist documenting representations on the board. The guide places a lot of emphasis on the physical environment where this happens, specifically using, quote, vertical non-permanent surfaces.
Yes, a very academic term.
Right. To translate that out of educational jargon, we're essentially talking about whiteboards on the walls, right? Why is standing at a whiteboard so critical to this guild work?
It comes back to lowering the stakes of failure. Think about it. When a student's sitting at a desk, hunched over a piece of paper and pen, a mistake feels permanent.
Yeah, it's a permanent record of them being wrong.
Exactly. But a whiteboard marker can be erased with the swipe of a finger. It is inherently non-permanent.
Huh.
When you have students working in visibly random groups, standing up at whiteboards around the room, everyone can see everyone else working.
And more importantly, everyone can see everyone else getting stuck.
Precisely. It completely normalizes the struggle. When the entire guild is stuck at the whiteboard, it isn't a failure. It's just the next phase of the expedition.
The pressure is distributed across the heist crew.
Yeah. Because they have to physically stand together and map out their thinking, it forces them to communicate their reasoning and justify their steps to each other. And that peer-to-peer justification, that is the exact mechanism that builds deep conceptual understanding.
So the guild is assembled, the roles are assigned, and they are standing at the whiteboards. Let's talk about the world they are stepping into, Frostfall. Because the field guide is very, very specific about the tone of this environment.
Tone is everything here.
Right, we were talking about an immersive, scientific Arctic engineering environment. The artwork looks like vintage WPA National Park posters, survival codices, topographic maps, and technical diagrams. It is decidedly not childish cartoons or corporate edtech gamification with, like, bright neon digital stickers.
No, the aesthetic is deeply intentional. It respects the intelligence of middle schoolers.
Which is so rare.
It is. 12 and 13-year-olds are incredibly sensitive to being patronized. If you give them cartoon animals, they will immediately disengage. Frostfall frames the mathematics as a serious tool for survival and understanding reality.
They aren't just solving for X to please a teacher so they can go to recess.
Exactly. The world requires them to map terrain, analyze risk, and ration supplies using mathematical modeling. The environment itself is as much a teacher as the guide is.
Wait, I need to push back here, though. If we are framing this as a harsh survival scenario in an Arctic freeze, doesn't a mistake seem, well, fatal? If you mess up your supply rations in the frozen wilderness, you die. Doesn't that high-stakes framing actually increase the math anxiety we were just trying to eliminate with the armor?
That is a very intuitive concern. It really is. But it actually works exactly in the opposite way. This raises the core question of how we view errors.
Okay, how so?
In Frostfall, mistakes are stripped of their moral weight. They are treated purely as neurological events and data points. The lab utilizes a scientific process called the thinking loop.
The thinking loop, what's that?
It goes start, process, stuck, revise, justify, discuss.
Okay, so if a mistake isn't fatal, what is it?
It's just a cue to debug. Think of it like software engineering or, actual Arctic engineering. Let's say your guild is calculating the structural integrity of a snow bridge, and you get the math wrong.
Boom, the bridge falls down.
Right, the simulation says the bridge collapsed under the snow load.
Hmm.
But you don't get a permanent red F on a test. The game essentially says, okay, the structural equation was off, debug it, find where the math broke down, revise the equation, and rebuild the bridge.
Because learning actually occurs in that friction.
Yes. Learning happens in the zone of productive discomfort. It's that sweet spot between being bored by something too easy and overwhelmed by something too hard.
That makes total sense.
By framing math as an engineering survival scenario, failure is simply part of the scientific process. It's just data for the next attempt. You literally cannot survive Frostfall on your first try.
That completely flips the script. You aren't failing, you're just gathering data. But, before an explorer can gather that data, they need the right equipment. Let's look at the gear these adventurers carry into the wild to prepare for the expedition. How do traditional classroom tools translate into this world?
The physical tools of the system are brilliant, really, because they map real-world instructional supports directly to the game's mechanics. First, you have campfire challenges.
Campfire challenges.
Yeah, these are essentially what teachers call bell ringers. Short, low-stakes activities at the start of a session to warm up their cognitive load. It's much like stretching before a run. You literally have to thaw out the brain before you can do heavy lifting.
I love that.
And what else? Then you have maps, which track their progress through massive mathematical domains rather than just, checking off daily worksheets. But perhaps most importantly, you have the adventurer's logs.
See, I am fascinated by the adventurer's logs because traditionally a student's log is just a grade book full of past failures, right? A list of C minuses and Ds that just haunt them.
A literal ledger of their anxiety.
Exactly. But looking at this, it's totally different. I actually equate the adventurer's log to a video game skill tree. In a video game, when you unlock a new grappling hook, it fundamentally changes how you can move through the world. You can access areas you couldn't reach before. Is that what's happening here?
That analogy is spot on. The adventurer's log acts as a comprehensive portfolio assessment system.
So it's proof of what they can do.
Yes. Instead of taking a high-stakes, multiple-choice test on a Friday that just tells a student what they don't know, they are constantly documenting their discoveries in this log. They write down their revised strategies. They document their successful encounters. When they learn a new formula, it really is like unlocking a grappling hook. And what's crucial is how this system handles loot.
Right, because loot in modern games is usually just a meaningless digital coin or like a new cosmetic hat for your avatar.
Exactly. And that kind of extrinsic reward doesn't build lasting motivation. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
In Frostfall, loot represents actual instructional supports and scaffolding.
Give me an example of that.
Okay, finding a hidden cache might mean the quartermaster unlocks a new visual fraction model that the whole team can use in future encounters. Or it might be a competency-based badge that proves they have mastered algebraic expressions. They are gathering concrete evidence that their thinking is getting stronger.
Which really brings us to the ultimate point of all this. Why go through the trouble of guilds and whiteboards and Arctic survival scenarios?
It's a lot of work.
It is. And we live in an era where artificial intelligence can do procedural calculation instantly. I can pull out my phone right now, take a picture of a calculus worksheet, and an AI will solve it in 3 seconds. If a machine can do that, why are we assigning it to 12-year-olds? What does this all mean for the future of these students?
That is the million-dollar question, and honestly, it is the exact reason this laboratory exists. The reality is that human economic and societal value no longer lies in being a slow, error-prone calculator.
Because machines do it better.
Right. If all a student knows is how to follow a memorized procedure, an algorithm will replace them. Human value lies in reasoning, creativity, and judgment.
Knowing which math to use rather than just how to crunch the numbers.
Exactly. The Adventurer's Journal proves they are building true mathematical power. By facing the storms of Frostfall, they are learning how to interpret a messy, real-world problem. They are deciding what mathematical tools to apply.
They're becoming adaptable.
Yes. They are making mistakes, debugging their processes, and communicating their solutions to a team. They are no longer acting like human calculators. They're acting like actual mathematicians and engineers.
It is a complete rewiring of the adolescent brain. We've talked about how disengagement and saying I'm bad at math is just a protective shield. We've explored how struggle actually means your brain is growing and how complex problems are best solved collaboratively, standing at a whiteboard with your guild. I want you, the listener, to reflect on your own relationship with learning and difficulty. Because, this isn't just about middle school math.
The psychology applies everywhere. We all face our own blizzards.
Exactly. Whether you're prepping for a high-stakes boardroom meeting, trying to teach yourself a new coding language late at night, or just sitting at the kitchen table trying to help your kid with their homework without losing your temper. The principles of Frostfall apply to you, too. Are you facing your challenges with a rigid mindset, terrified of making a public mistake?
Or are you facing them with the adaptable mindset of an explorer, viewing errors simply as data to debug your next attempt?
It requires an incredible amount of vulnerability to shift from that rigid mindset to an exploratory one.
Yeah.
But when you realize that confusion is just the prerequisite to understanding, the entire landscape changes.
It really does.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've seen how we can completely transform how a student views the dreaded subject of mathematics, turning it into an epic, collaborative struggle against the elements simply by changing the environment and rewriting their identity within it. If that is possible for a cynical 13-year-old, what impossible challenges in your own life could you conquer by rewriting your own character sheet?
Real mathematical power is built, not born.